Okay, awesome, Lauren. So thanks so much for being here. Um, Pleasure speaking with you as always. Love the turtleneck today. That's fun. Uh, and so let's just kind of jump into it. These interviews we put together really just to serve other people who are struggling. They're in a bit of a tough spot. And, what I've learned in my work is that it's easy for people to feel very consumed by their problems and feel like there's not like a way out or a way forward, or they're just feeling like really, really stuck. And it's better for people to kind of hear from somebody who's actually gone through the process of finding some answers so that they can see it's possible. They can learn a couple tips and things to keep in mind to get their journey started. And they can get some encouragement, quite honestly, too. So, maybe just to start, can you just, give everybody just an introduction of whatever level you're comfortable with and help us get to know a little bit of the situation you were in prior to us working together to start.
Yeah, so I think I probably came to it as a client that wasn't, like I'm in my partner and I are in a relationship where I think for most of it, I would have considered that it was pretty solid and that, things were functioning very well. And it was certain things that I didn't even think of as, oh, we need to seek additional support for this. And we had a few things where we had a few incidents that really made things kind of come to a head where I thought, gosh, there's probably certainly something we need to be doing different here that we're not thinking of, or, just to seek additional support with it. And so for me, I guess coming to this was very much, I guess, at a time where I was in a lot of pain about it and just really wanted things to improve. I just didn't know how. And with when I came to this program, or when I first looked at it, it was recommended by a friend who was going through emotional mastery. And I was looking just for myself initially to do emotional mastery. But when I was exploring the options of that and relationship mastery seemed right. And my partner also was on board with doing that as well. So I thought, why don't I just go that route and try it out? And also I was just attracted to it because of, I think, just the theory behind it that, you can go through hours and hours of counseling, but that something like this actually gives you some tools and strategies to kind of coach you through it. So it seemed really tangible, something that would work really well for me personally, but also that was really more attractive to my partner as well. As someone who had never been in therapy before, this was a more, attractive option for us because it wasn't your traditional style thing of that. It really just kind of gives you the tools that that can help you, work towards that and work through things in ways that I think seem, just like more, I don't know, practical for the way that kind of we approach things.
Right. Yeah, definitely not your traditional style, I think.
No,
you guys got into it. I think one thing that's important for people to get, when I started on my path, I was passionate about mental health, depression, anxiety, things like that, primarily depression. And I never, ever thought I would ever coach people on relationships. The whole thing of it seemed strange to me. I'm like, I don't know. But then I started working with people on their mental health, and I realized something, and that's that you can't work on mental health without working on relationships. It's just, they're pretty much two sides of the same coin, really, because even the things that we feel depressed about or anxious about typically we're worried about being, feeling enough to other people, or we're worried that our relationships won't last, or we're worried that we don't have enough security in our relationships with the people at work, right? Or whatever it is. I mean, how we feel is so intimately connected to our relationships with other people. It's just interesting that you chose that. And I mean, it seemed to have paid off, pretty well for you. Can you maybe describe what was like the couple of outcomes you felt like you were coming into the program trying to get, would you say?
I mean, one very clear one was just communication, and understanding the tools for how do you diffuse a situation when it's feeling quite emotionally heightened. Um, and yeah, how do you just productively interact together with things where you're coming to them feeling very strong emotion? And that's why initially for me, it was thinking, oh, okay, I really need to work on just myself. And that's why I thought I should just do this myself. But then, I was able to do that jointly, with my partner going through the program with me, which was really excellent. Because as you say, it really was, how do we do this actually together and work through this? So I think, yeah, that was really helpful that I had that, because that communication style, I could, as it's designed, you can have it where just one person works on that. But if you have the other person there, it's even better, because they're hearing and they're understanding the tools and the things that you're going to be able to employ to do that, in your day to day. So communication was really a big one. Another big outcome was just for me personally, as I said, it was just being able to understand how to regulate myself when I am feeling things quite strongly and deeply. And I think that I really did learn things through this program that I didn't even realize were kind of at the core of that. Uh, without, yeah. So, I mean, without getting into too much of the specifics of it. So it was, I think that was really it. I didn't know, I think sometimes you don't really know the outcomes that you're looking for. You just want the just situation to change and improve and be um, not as tumultuous, or not feel so that it's something that you feel like you're kind of like not, you're like failing at, I guess, in some way. So like, what can you do to improve? And when I did come out of it, I did feel like I was equipped with a lot of that, both not only jointly, but just individually in terms of what I needed to do to bring things to the table in a more productive way.
Yep, totally makes sense. So, and you had tried a little bit of traditional like couples counseling before, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, just one or two sessions. It was really while we were kind of exploring what do we need and what works for us. So we looked at that, and then really within the same week or even the next week, we had our first consultation with you. So it was
Okay.
kind of looking at what's going to work and not. And very quickly it was like, okay, now let's just commit to this one, because this actually seems like something that will work for us.
Right. All right. Okay, cool. So let's maybe, if you could, I'm just curious, like what were some of the big takeaways, because whenever we human beings go through an emotionally significant experience in their life, afterwards they look back on it and they tend to remember a couple highlights, right? Like this is how we usually feel about, say, college or high school or, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like what were a couple of the maybe light bulb moments or like times where things shifted for you? Can you kind of speak to a few of those things that you feel like you'll take out of this experience?
Yeah, when I talk about just like the control, I really appreciated the approach to just states and monitoring what your state is, because I think we all get into situations where what you're reacting and what you're saying isn't really necessarily what you feel, but you're like caught up in that emotional state. And it's just like understand, and I was always conscious of it, but it was actually going through something this where it kind of names that. And so knowing what that looks like and feels like, and as you say, even putting a name to that, like what that person is, and it kind of like it helps to pull you out of it, and then think about how do I flip that into some, how do I come down from that state and then approach that differently. So that was definitely pretty huge light bulb moment for me. The other one was about just stories, just this idea that, there's things that we really do get hypnotized and we believe of stories of things about people, about relationships that really just attract so much from us. And if I really reflect on it, that is a big reason I came to it, because I kind of knew that as well. When you replay things in your mind, or that you kind of feel like, oh, everyone's out to get me kind of thing. It's and that's not right, but you can't seem to, I feel, you find sometimes that you're really trapped and caught up in that way of thinking. So I really liked, I guess, that way that was kind of called out, and that you gave like really practical steps and tools in terms of how you unpack that thinking. And kind of release that. And as you said, like it's kind of like carrying around a bunch of bricks on your back, it's just like you feel lighter once you're able to release a lot of that. And that was really significant for me in this.
Right, right. I think I appreciate you sharing those, and I think those are important. And I think too, for the audience, there's a simple little framework I teach sometimes. I think I went over it with you guys too. You almost hit on all three of them, but the top two you said were changing your emotional state. Because usually if we're feeling stuck or we're feeling like we're not getting what we want in a particular area of life, it's because we're in a crappy state. We keep feeling all anxious or angry or sad or whatever. And in those states, it's like your mind is not able to come up with the answers of what to do. So learning how to change state is so key. Number two would be changing the story you hit on, right? Sometimes we just have an old story going on. And then the third one, which I know we covered in so much detail together over the months, was strategy, like new strategies for communication, new strategies for conflict resolution, right? All of that type of stuff. Sometimes that is what people are missing. They in relationships in particular, I don't know if you can empathize with this or not, but for most people, they'll conclude, I've tried everything to get through to my partner, and what they've really done is they've tried the same 2 or 3 things over and over and over again, and then they've called that everything, right? When it's not everything, of course. But yeah, those are all really good. We don't have to go into all the specifics, whatever you're comfortable with, of course, but what's interesting too is you guys came into the program where there had been sort of an ongoing pain point, let's call it, right? It seemed like you both had a different vision for what the future of the relationship and the future of the family needed to be. And obviously that's a pretty tough thing to be in. And I think a lot of couples can relate to that, whether it's where do we send the kids to college, or, where are we going to live, or when are we going to retire, right? There's all sorts of different things. I'm just curious if you can speak at all to kind of some of the dynamics that were going on there, how you and your partner were feeling about that. How long had that been like a thorn in the side, and what did you kind of learn as we went through our process to address that?
Yeah, I think, so for us, it was, I guess, around like a shared vision, or I guess understandings, around an issue where early in the relationship, I think I thought it was pretty agreed upon about like what that shared vision was. And it's not that it wasn't, I think my partner did too, but as life changes and things change, that changed, what that was. And I over time became pretty resentful about that. Like, why aren't we achieving that? Why aren't we both like hitting off on that goal that we both agreed on, and for in our instance, it was really about location. It's like where we're living.
Right.
And it caused a lot of resentment for me over time. And I think, in terms of what this did for that is that, sometimes you get into a state when your back's up against the wall, or you feel like, you're not really operating as a team. And that was kind of like, I guess, a big thing that we really brought to this, just not feeling like we were operating as a team anymore. Like for me personally, I was kind of like in an ultimatum state. It wasn't about leaving necessarily. I hadn't gotten to that point, but it was more just ultimatum state. Like, well, if I don't get what I want, then like, where I can't do this, or you have till this point that we do this, that we move. And I think it really helped me kind of explore that and where that was coming from, and think of it, how the road, I think you were talking about, thinking about how it's a map, and how do you get to point X, and what does it look like to get to point X. And if we had even gotten to point X the way I had been approaching it, we wouldn't have gotten across that finish line well, like even if we had actually achieved that and actually achieved the move. So I feel like that it really made me analyze that more, and how, I can really be operated. I myself wasn't operating as a team in terms of my way of approaching that, to get that result that I wanted. So I think that for us, it was, in terms of looking at that, and when your back's up against the wall, like, how do you react? How do you be supportive? How do you communicate like what your needs are, and in a way that your partner also understands it? And that, I think, for both of us was a real big part of what this process did for us in terms of understanding that. Because that way of thinking just wasn't productive. And then, you just kind of, you feel like you're in this like desperate state, and it's, yeah. And then what you manifest with that and the things that you say, then from there on out, just bleed into so many other things that aren't productive.
Right. Right. I really appreciate you sharing that. What's interesting too is in my line of work is every time I'm working with somebody, I think people tend to have this idea because they're so close to their problems that it's easy to kind of feel very sort of sensitive about their own problems and think like, oh my gosh, everybody else on Instagram and Facebook seems to be having a perfect marriage and a perfect like life. And actually I see inside of what's going on in all of these different couples and all of these different people. And it's almost always the same issues popping up again and again. It's just slightly different biographies, slightly different cultures, slightly different upbringings, but the same types of issues. Like so many people have had exactly what you're talking about, where fundamentally in a couple, what tends to happen is, we tend to think I have needs that my partner isn't respecting or honoring or even understanding. And then meanwhile, the partner is feeling the exact same thing. Like, my partner over here doesn't even understand my needs and they certainly don't respect them. So you got two people who, even though they love each other, just mentally, right, our subconscious gets so based in fear that we start to blame kind of without even knowing it. It's just the general attitude where we kind of are pointing a finger at the other person going, well, I'm doing my part. It's their problem. And we have to break through the gridlock. We have to be able to come together and say like, well, what do you both mutually want, right? And how do we develop a communication style so that you can create it? And I think one of the things I was trying to work on with you too is like, as opposed to that story of it's either what I want or it's what he wants, right? Let's instead make it, what do you both want? And how can you both get what you want, right? And it's amazing how much the brain starts to enlist its creative resources in helping you get a future that would really be desirable once we shift that narrative and that point of view. I thought that was a big turning point for you guys. So.
Yeah, and I think it is what's like really great about it is like, I think if you've been in a relationship long enough, it's nice to have a process like this with structure that really does help you kind of recalibrate and reflect on shared goals and vision and write that down and those types of things. I think that, most people, you just go through your day to day or year by year passes and you don't really, I mean, some couples do it, but many don't, where you just like, even from the start, sit down and think about, what do we
get on autopilot.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's really great for that because I love that stuff. I do it for myself. I mean, probably not as structured as this process. I think to do that jointly with someone and plan, it's really nice to be able to do that and then really have plans to revisit that. Because that way, you can kind of together kind of understand what each other wants or, want out of the relationship, want out of goals you want to achieve together. I think it's just a nice thing to really sit back and think through, because a lot of things like you say, you go in autopilot and you don't even do it, or you think you're doing it and you think you're on the same page, but it hasn't really been communicated that explicitly. So I think it's just a nice moment to be able to do that.
That's great. I think there's two final things I want to make sure we touch on. One of them is that usually when people jump into the relationship program, they usually are trying to, work on one relationship in particular. For most people, that's going to be their romantic relationship and or lack thereof, and they're trying to, figure that out. But what everybody finds as they go through it is that multiple relationships change, or at least their relationship with, sometimes it's a relationship with like a deceased parent and they still interpret that relationship in a particular way, and that relationship changes, or it's the relationship with themselves that kind of changes a little bit as they go through the program. We've talked about some other auxiliary relationships that were creating some stressors, and we uncovered a lot of things that you probably didn't even expect were going to pop up in the program. Yeah. I'm just wondering if you can maybe say a few words about any changes that have come about, hopefully positive, from auxiliary relationships too.
Yeah, I think that, like when you're obviously in a relationship, if you're fortunate enough, you kind of have a community that surrounds you with that. So that's usually family and friends who are like kind of, your village or like inner circle of that, sometimes chosen, sometimes not. And I think, this program really helps you think about what you need to be focusing on. I think obviously putting your relationship first with that. But then also, how do you interact, with in-laws? How do you interact with friends, that of your partners, or, I think it's kind of like that other side of the fence. How do you have those positive interactions in a way that really actually does enrich your relationship as opposed to detracting from it? And then just reflecting on your own relationships with people that have kind of shaped who you are, whether, like it's your parents or, your family, your friends. I think that those are things that you don't often reflect on, how much those things can kind of affect your immediate ecosystem of what's going on. And I found it really useful for that. And like you say, the tools that you give in relationship mastery really are very applicable to any relationship that you're in. It's not just about that. And so I really appreciated that, because I thought, really, as I said, when I was looking at the two programs, should I do emotional mastery? Should I do that? It was this one was actually most suited to me, because it really was about a little bit of both. And I like the fact that you bring that with that. But I think with this one, yeah, it really is suited to that, because it really makes you think not only about your immediate circle, but what's happening outside, then the periphery of that you have to improve, and why is that important, that kind of thing. It really makes you scrutinize that and think about how you can do those things better.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the metaphors I introduced with you guys that I think is a valuable takeaway for anybody is, if there's like an ongoing tension between one person and another member of the family, or if there's a disagreement that hasn't been fully processed and resolved, even if it's years ago, we're very often holding grudges against our partner without even knowing that we're doing it sometimes. And it's like having a stone in your shoe, and every time you step, every time you interact in the relationship, it's a sore point. It's still a thing that's bothering you. And, developing the framework that I know we used multiple times to kind of pull those stones out, can be very liberating. So
That's right.
One thing you touched on a minute ago, and I think this is my last big question for you before we just kind of send you off, is, most people don't sit down and kind of hit that reset button, right? Inertia becomes very automatic, and people get into this mode where they're more hung up on making a living and getting so hung up on the stresses of everyday life of just maintaining a household. They never really sit down and actually design a life, like design a relationship, to, ask themselves what matters to us. How do we want to be showing up for each other, right? All those things. You just completed the final segment of the program where you're creating your new kind of relationship vision and writing your new vows and all that stuff. I'm just curious, what does the future look like now? When you think about your relationship and what's ahead, how do you feel now?
I definitely feel a lot more, I guess hopeful would be the word, because when you're coming at things from such a place of pain, or like these stories that you convinced yourself, or like even the big thing, and that was another big takeaway about like the intent that you're attributing to people in your relationships, whether it, like I was saying, whether it's actually your partner or the people around you, just like these things that you're convinced that they have, that they think or feel or have against you. For me, I definitely feel a lot lighter. And anytime I feel myself trapped up in that, it's like I don't have to get as caught up in that. And so I think, I do feel more hopeful in that way, with my partner, because I do feel like we have reset and recalibrated in a way that I'm like, okay, I take a lot of comfort in, okay, I feel like we're more on the same page now, which I think ultimately that's all we ever really want. Like we really want to feel that we're, that you're operating as a team, that that doesn't mean you see everything the same way. It's just that you understand, there's mutual understanding and respect for what each person's bringing to that. And I think, like I said, that applies to everything around you. So I think even just my outlook of how I approach others, in those, periphery relationships, not only with my parents, but like with, just anyone, family in general, and in-laws, my parents in-law, all of them. I think that I've really, it really, to me, I think has giving me a lot more hope and confidence, I guess, even just in myself in terms of how I manage myself and my state, because you can't control everybody else's. And as you said, as you often said to me, it's not as though everybody has a list of what all your rules are, nor should they ever. So I think it really has like freed me, or I got like liberated me in that way, in terms of getting so caught up in some of that, and like some things that whether it was my own values and things like that, that I felt like, oh, we just don't have the same values, or we don't see things the same way. I feel a lot more free about that now, to approach things in a way that makes me feel more hopeful about how I do get to my endpoint.
Very nice. Very, very nice. I love it. So I think last question for you would just be, let's say you were talking to, well, because you are, through this medium, right? There are going to be people who are in a relationship right now, and they've probably been frustrated for a long time. They've probably been feeling stuck. They've been feeling like, their partner's never going to change, or they're just not compatible. This is what we call developing a story of incompatibility. This is what happens when we feel like we haven't gotten the breakthrough we want in our relationship after a long time. Our mind naturally wants to drift and create an escape route. And, some people are going to be watching, looking at that. And I'm just curious, what would you say to somebody who's been feeling that sort of downtrodden, maybe hopeless thing, and they're not really sure, even though were totally in love with this person, maybe they still are, but they're kind of getting in their head with a doubtfulness. What would you want them to know and hear? What would you say to them?
Is that, there's things like that, and ways of thinking and ways of being, that you would say in this, that like don't bring you closer to your partner, that you're in the person you're in the relationship with. And it is really about analyzing what are the things that will make you closer. And that's ultimately what you want, and so things like ways of thinking, or ways of communication, are all tactics that actually make you not as close and create that separation and make you check out of a relationship. So what are the things that and tools and ways of approaching it that actually can make you closer? And then ultimately that actually helps you address some of the issues that have actually perpetuated that to begin with. So I think it's really thinking about that. And as you often say as well, like love is really at the core of all of it. So if you're really just starting from that point of, you want to be you are still committed to this, and you commit to seeing that through, and you approach that from a place of love, what are the things that you can do to make that worth it? It is always worth it, but what are the things that you can do that actually make you achieve that? And I think that ultimately that's really what we all want. We don't want to be in those states where we're feeling those things. We know we don't. And I think when you're feeling hopeless, it's because you don't really know what you can do to change it or get out of it. And so that's why I just found this useful, because it was kind of making me also scrutinize what are the things I need to do to make them, to get closer to them, and also make them feel more loved as well. Which I think is you lose a lot of sight. You lose sight of that when you're just caught up in your own pain. It's just hard to be that for people.
I love that. I love that. That's a great answer. I love it. It's the case in almost every source of stuckness in any person's life. Is we're usually so hung up on what we're afraid of, or we're asking ourselves, like, why can't my partner change? And if we just started to introduce the line of thought of what could I do to get closer to my partner, it starts the whole totally different momentum, totally different. So, well, Lauren, it's been an absolute pleasure working with you. I'm sure we'll connect again in the future. Sometime you and your spouse's commitment to each other has been incredible. It's a rare thing. It's an incredible gift, that the two of you decided to really prioritize each other and hit the reset button and do all those incredible things. It's great. And I'm inspired by you both. And I know other people will be as well. And I think the one last thing I would encourage the audience to consider is that such a small fraction of people, both men and women, will ever really take it upon themselves to learn and master this area of their life, which is so devastatingly horrible, because this is probably the one area of life that has the greatest impact on our emotional well-being long term. You know, I mean, there's nobody who's unhappy in their marriage that's happy in life. It just does not exist, you know. So I think that people need to get proactive and do something, right? Take some type of action, whatever that is. But thank you for sharing a part of your story, and it's been great. And
Well, thank you, Ty.
thanks
It's
for
been
everything.
great working with you.
Of course. Awesome. All right. Well, great connecting with you, and we'll chat soon. So take care for now.
Yes.
All right. See you, Lauren. Bye.
Bye.